Hey guys, welcome to our next mini lesson, which is going to be focusing on the New England colonies. And today we're going to be looking at Merciless Massachusetts. So we're going to get started here. Just so you know, again, what we're trying to accomplish with this particular mini lesson is looking at our different kind of colonial settlements, and again, looking at why they began in context, what were their successes, failures, goals, these kind of things, right? So after you've grabbed the notes, let's talk about what our kind of guiding questions are here. So number one, what motivates human exploration? And then two, how are human behavior shaped or not by the laws of society? Okay, and again, please feel free to pause this at any time as you begin to work through things, and we will get going. Okay, so with the New England colonies, we're going to have to do a little bit of myth busting to start out, as well as just talk about some general terms. Because even though everybody feels like they know or maybe have heard of the Puritans, the Pilgrims, and lots of things about them, that they wore weird hats and had buckle shoes and buckle hats to match, it's a little bit more complicated. So let's talk first of all about kind of the umbrella of our different groups here. Okay, so first of all, the Puritans were a group of Protestant, basically Christians from England. Okay, and the Pilgrims were a smaller group of them. And really where they're coming from, and what you need to know about them, is that they're kind of shaped with their conflicts with the Church of England. Now, the Pilgrims and the Puritans, at this time, they really preferred to call themselves the Separatists because they really wanted to separate themselves from what they saw as a very, very morally and religiously corrupt England. Now, the motivation for the Puritans, and then later the Pilgrims as well, to migrate was not this idea that's been passed down previously in history that they wanted the freedom to worship. It's a little bit more complex than that. It's not just about religious freedom for them. When the Puritans and the Pilgrims, also to a lesser extent, when they wanted to go for the whole let's go set up a colony in America thing, it's really because they wanted the ability to enforce proper religious beliefs, or again, what they saw as proper across society, not only on themselves, but then also on the other people who were there. So instead of thinking of it as more as like a religious freedom argument, think of it as more like a kind of religious policy kind of argument. So again, they want the freedom to enforce proper religious beliefs on themselves and also others. Okay, the motivation to migrate was not freedom of worship. It was the freedom basically to persecute themselves and also others who did not kind of comply with that. All right, and that's going to then bring us to the first separatists. So 35 separatists, which we later will call them the Pilgrims, and also 67 other migrants. So again, the Pilgrims are not going to go alone on this. They get on a ship, which is called the Mayflower, and then they accidentally land in Plymouth because they're bad at sailing, basically. Okay. The thing you need to understand about this is very, very different automatically here from any kind of colony that has been intended to set up from this point. So for example, like with Jamestown, they were backed by a company, that was sponsoring for people to go, right? They had paid money. It's different than, for example, like Lord Baltimore and Cecilius Calvert, where he gets a land grant from the king and then goes over and makes a colony. These folks are just grabbing a bunch of people and just going. Okay, they have no permission to be there, so they have no royal charter, no business backing set up, and that is why when they start kind of this journey as they're traveling over, they write this Mayflower Compact. Now we could go into lots of detail about what's in the Mayflower Compact. What you really need to know is that is kind of their at least early on, kind of their model for how the colony is going to be self-governed. And what it says, for example, in the colony is that people who are there can have freedom of religion. Okay, it's going to allow people to vote. It's going to be kind of a more kind of democratic setup. And if you're like, wait a second, this doesn't sound like the Puritans. Well, the Pilgrims are a little bit more religiously tolerant than some of the folks that are going to come after them. Now, again, what does the actual journey look like? Well, It takes a few months, and again, because they're bad at sailing and also don't know the proper times when to show up in, in the colonies in terms of what's good for planning, they show up in November 1620. And I don't know if you know anything about like New England winters, but they're bad, and it's really really bad in 1620. The winter automatically just kills half of them off the bit. And the only reason why they do survive is because the Pilgrims, who again are supposed to be like the really really religious folks there, they basically raid the burial graves of dead Native Americans, and they steal the corn that had been buried with them, and that's kind of how they make it through the winter. It's pretty awful, but the spring is going to change things, which again, things are going to be looking up. And again, I can talk more about how bad the winter is. Like they actually, one guy eats his wife when she dies. It's just the winter is really really brutal in New England. So when the spring changes things, well, first of all, the settlers start occupying more of local Indians' land, who had at this point died from waves of smallpox that had been hitting the colonies. And 20 years later, there's over 3,000 settlers that are now in this new colony in Plymouth. Okay. So before we go on here, okay, I would like you to pretend that your friend was absent from class today and take a moment on your notes. You'll see I've left you a space to do that. Write what you would say if you had to explain the lesson so far to your friend. Go for it. And when you're ready, you can continue on with me. Now, as the Plymouth colony begins growing and growing and growing, we have more of these Puritans, separatists, who are coming over. Okay, and fast forward a good, few dozen years, and now all of a sudden, instead of it just being Plymouth, we have the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and it is really run completely by Puritans at this point. And its first governor is that guy right up there. His name is John Winthrop, which is with his fun Elizabethan column there. Okay, the Puritans are much, much, much more strict than the original Pilgrims were. Okay, so for example, because the Puritans believed that all law was based on the Bible, as you can see on that point there, everything is tied into religion. Only church members can vote and hold office. And again, these people are like elite church members. So the governor, the council, the assembly was there. They all had to have very high-ranking positions in the church. There's also no religious tolerance at all. So only Puritanism was expected, and you had to show up for church. Now, some people have interpreted all of this with the Puritans as being obsessed with the religion, that they hated sex. That's actually not true. The Puritans really encouraged the scoodly poopin as a part of marriage, but they did believe that deviant sexual crimes, such as adultery or things of that nature, were punishment by whippings, fines, and then other fun punishments that we could go and talk about. Okay. Now, what are the Puritans all about? Well, what are they aiming for here? And we should kind of talk about what their goals were. The Puritans' goals that they could make this idea, Plymouth example, Massachusetts Bay, that it could be a city on a hill, an example to other colonies about like perfect Christian laws and behavior. And this kind of ties way back into some older Christian ideas that come from something called Calvinism, which was really tied into this idea about predestination. And if you don't know what predestination is, maybe you've seen the movie Final Destination, where everybody's fates are written at the beginning of the movie, and then you watch some pretty awful ways that they die. The whole idea with predestination is that God has chosen this group called the elect that are going to heaven no matter what. And then the whole idea of this elect and the Pilgrims and the Puritans is that they believe that you kind of had to then spend your entire life meditating, reading the Bible, worshiping to figure out if you were one of these people. Now, the problem that the Puritans are going to run into is this, and it's the question: how do you live in but not of an unholy world? So the problem for the Puritans is that, and just like people everywhere, is that people do things often that is considered morally wrong, right? People fall into what Christians would, for example, characterize as sin. Again, it can be like monetary sin, like we buy things that we don't need. It could be sexual sin, other types of sin, et cetera, et cetera. And what the Puritans find happen to them is that they have this ideal of them living on this city on the hill. There's this fall in terms of behavior as they fall down into sin, and then they go through this renewed religious effort to try to get back to that ideal place. Now, this cycle, okay, this dilemma, the problem that they can't figure out the answer to, is called the declension model. And again, it's this question like, how can they live in but not of the world? And the eventual solution that they come up with is something called the gospel of wealth. Now, this idea has been passed on and morphed a lot since then, but it is an answer to, or it's rather a solution to this dilemma. Well, how do you know if you are one of these elect, or how do you know if you're, again, following ideal Christian behavior? You know you're blessed and righteous if you have money in your pocket, because God blesses, as the Puritans might say, God blesses those with money who are, again, righteous, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? This idea of the gospel of wealth is still around to this very day, although it's kind of morphed and taken on some kind of different twists and turns. So there you go. Okay. Again, just to kind of recap, if you're a little bit confused, you don't need to take notes on this slide. The Pilgrims were a small group of Puritans who founded the Plymouth colony, and it had different practices in government than the Puritans later who come around and found the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay, so again, just to make sure we're good on that. Before you end, make sure you check out the exit ticket and some of the activities that come after this and the rest of the lesson. I'll see you guys next time.